Tonight, the aftermath of a night of terror on the streets of Clifton Hill. Melbourne police have charged a 19-year-old former Duntroon cadet with the murder of one of the 6 people gunned down on the streets of Clifton Hill last night. Another 18 people were injured in the shooting spree, which lasted about 40 minutes. Melissa McDonough reports.
These pictures show the extent of the carnage. It began at exactly 9:30, according to residents whose houses line the street of murder.
I said, "What's going on?" I thought it was an accident. We're trying to help the poor guys. She said, no, keep away. So that's when we heard about 10 shots all at once. It sounded like 2 or 3 guys were shooting all together at just whoever was driving past. So I think we're pretty lucky that we didn't stop, even though we sort of did. Just trying to help people, and look what happens.
Mona's brother and his 2 friends ran towards the wounded motorcyclist, who was waving and crying for help. The gunman shot the 2 friends, one in the neck and the other in the arm, and the motorcyclist died before ambulance officers could reach him. Within a 200-metre stretch, 4 others were already dead. Just south of the railway station, a dead motorist near the dead motorcyclist. In the gutter were the bullet-ridden bodies of a man and a woman. And in a car outside a service station, another murder victim, a woman passenger. Another woman who'd thought there'd been a car accident stopped to help. The gunman shot her in the back. She was taken to hospital in a critical condition. Later, yet another victim, a man in his late 20s, died in hospital of gunshot wounds.
They had to lie down because nobody was game enough to come close to them. Even when the ambulance came, it was a long time before, it seems to me anyway, before anyone there to, get out from the protections over the car.
The gunman attacked the police too. He punctured the fuel tank of the police helicopter so it had to make a forced landing. And he shot at a divisional van, wounding a policeman inside. The killer used a pump-action shotgun and 2 high-powered rifles, which police say are the same make as those used by the top-end killer earlier this year.
The police and ambulance officers who braved the hail of gunfire in Hoddle Street last night have been described as heroes. Today, Virginia Harsiker spoke to one of the first ambulancemen at the scene.
I don't think anyone that I know of has been in that sort of situation before, so certainly an experience that we won't forget.
Peter Collins was with the first mobile intensive care ambulance on the scene. He and his assistant, Noel Shields, ducked bullets as they pulled wounded victims behind cover to assist them. Today, Peter has been hailed as a hero, but he says it was only due to quick manoeuvres by the police that his team could reach the wounded.
Yeah, they drove into the line of what they thought was the line of fire at the time to protect the patients at the time. Then we got into the back of the ambulance and the police officers drove our ambulance for us again to protect the area.
Once the police had positioned the ambulance, Peter and his assistant scrambled from the back to assist a woman shot while trying to help 2 dead people she thought were car accident victims.
Were you afraid that you yourselves could be targets at that time?
Well, we weren't sure where the actual shots were coming from, but we were as sure as we could possibly be that it was safe at the time before we moved, yes.
Were you frightened?
I don't think we stopped to think about being frightened at the time. We're just doing our job.
So after the horrific scene of last night, how does an ambulance officer get over it?
I think it's just a matter of talking things out with wives and family and things like that to make sure that you're feeling okay after it's all over.
But last night there wasn't much time for talking afterwards, as Peter was immediately called out to another job. No, he says, it never ends.
Another of last night's heroes prefers to remain anonymous. He's a constable based in Fitzroy who succeeded in arresting the gunman just moments after a fellow officer had been wounded.
After firing at a traffic officer and at a police helicopter, the gunman was chased by a police car. He fired at the car, injuring 1 policeman. The police fired 1 shot back at him and called on him to surrender. Then a constable from Fitzroy grabbed him and handcuffed him.
Well, it would appear that the time he was grabbed, he was out of ammunition, but whether our constable knew that or not, I'm not in a position to say at this point in time, but except that he did do an excellent job and held on to him until assistance arrived to help him out.
For personal reasons, the Fitzroy constable wants to remain anonymous.
Of the injured who were taken to hospitals around Melbourne for treatment, 12 were discharged today, but 2 remain in a serious condition tonight. One of the luckier ones in a satisfactory condition is apprentice chef Andrew Hack.
Andrew Hack knows he was very lucky to survive last night's attack. Like dozens of others, he just happened to be driving along Hoddle Street when a single bullet was fired through the side of his car. As it passed through the console, his shoulder was sprayed with metal. The bullet lodged in his side. At first, he had no idea what was happening. He thought a bomb may have gone off.
I stopped, and as I said, I seen those 2 blokes in the gutter, and I felt I wanted to get out and help them, so I said, all right. But then, just as I opened my door, I heard another shot.
It was then he realised he had to get away. Blood was pouring from his side. Dizzy and confused, he drove 3 kilometres to his workplace, the Heidelberg Motor Inn, where he was met by workmates.
I was pretty calm, yeah. I went in there and I was all right. I walked in there all right. And I just looked, every time I look at it, I just feel like being sick, you know.
We thought he'd been in a fight or something because he's young and that maybe in a fight and was stabbed or something. We couldn't believe it when we found out that he'd been shot. The police, the ambulance officer said that he'd been shot.
In fact, Mr. Hack had no idea he'd been shot until he was taken to hospital.
I didn't know what it was.
You had no idea?
No, I didn't know it was a gun, you know, a bullet or anything. I thought it was something on the road, just like a bomb, you know.
He knows he was in the wrong place at the wrong time, but can't help thinking about what could have been.
Someone had been in the passenger seat, they probably would have been gone.
Dozens of police have spent most of the day in an intensive search of the Hoddle Street area, and many residents in the close-knit community are still trying to come to terms with the night of terror.
In the cold light of day, the full extent of the carnage became clear. There was an uneasy quiet along a road normally bustling with life and movement. For Martin Marr, the full impact of what had occurred last night was just beginning to sink in. He'd been caught in the crossfire and lay frozen in the bushes among a spray of bullets.
This policeman was putting that white tape, and he seen me in the bushes and he didn't know I was there, and he got pretty nervous, and he was pointing his gun and screaming for me to roll out with my hands up, and that was pretty scary.
With the entire block roped off, members of the homicide and forensic squads moved in to reconstruct the massacre, painstakingly combing the surroundings for spent cartridges and other clues. Dozens of bullets were recovered, as were the gunman's weapons, found in bushes just metres from 2 of his victims. For 78-year-old John Kendall, who's lived almost half his life in Clifton Hill, last night's tragedy has left him shocked.
You feel very sad when something like that happens. It happens to everybody. I never went to sleep after, and yet I'd taken sleeping tablets.
Everyone's pretty upset, everyone, you know, well, if everyone's just in a bad mood and everyone's grumpy with each other and all that.
By late morning, investigations at the scene were complete, and police allowed the fleet of waiting tow trucks to cart away the stricken vehicles. Later, a small sense of normality was restored as Hoddle Street reopened in time for this evening's peak hour traffic. But for many residents, the memories of last night's terror will linger.
Early this afternoon, a man appeared in the Melbourne Magistrates Court and was charged with 1 count of murder. Julian Knight, aged 19, of Ramsden Street, Clifton Hill, was charged with the murder of John Muscat, one of the 6 people killed in Clifton Hill last night. Chief Magistrate John Dugan refused bail and remanded Knight to appear again on August the 17th.